Hello, everyone. I'm Ed Marsh. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you happen to be joining from. Thanks so much for taking a little bit of time to spend with me today to talk about a topic that I find really interesting. First, quick introduction of myself. My name is Ed Marsh. I'm the founder of Ed Marsh Consulting. I'm a consultant, I'm an independent board director. I've run businesses and now I consult with B2B companies on revenue growth. And I really work in two different areas. One is sales team improvement with middle market B2B companies across a wide range of industries. The other is really the entire revenue growth process with industrial manufacturers. I'm a Private Directors Association certified in private equity portfolio company governance and private company governance. I've got a National Association of Corporate Directors certification. I'm active as a director, as a consultant. I've got experience across industrial and tech with lots of global. Graduate of Johns Hopkins, former Ranger qualified airborne infantry officer. I'm located in the Boston area. That's a quick introduction to me. Big point before we jump in and get started, stick around to the end because you're going to have an opportunity to grab yourself a free sales process evaluation using an online sales process grader. We're going to talk about some key terms today. Touch on these things quickly: sales methodology, sales process, sales playbook, and deal checklist or qualification scorecard. Let's talk about why this matters, first of all. Buyers don't need sellers for info anymore. That used to be the primary role of sellers, to provide information. In most cases today, the actual expertise that sellers bring is relatively limited. I mean, they've got technical engineers in the background, they've got technical salespeople, they've got product specialists. They're the ones that often bring the expertise. So the role of a sales rep in most cases is just a conduit of information. Now, great sales reps obviously have a lot of business savvy, they've got technical knowledge, but they really understand prospects' businesses. But those great reps are relatively rare. So from the buyer's perspective, what they really want sales for is access to pricing. And in many cases, pricing is available on a website, so you don't really need that much of it. You don't really need that help from a salesperson. Another thing that's going on is that buyer teams are bigger. There's 10 to 15 people now with vastly different priorities. Often people on the buying team may want the budget that's being discussed for their own projects. They may not want to do the work that's involved in changing. They might just kind of object to something that's being considered and want to intentionally just kind of slow it down or resist it. Buying journeys, as you see in this amazing drawing from Gartner, buying journeys are really long and convoluted. We bounce back and forth between what marketing used to do, what sales used to do, and all these different sorts of kind of different engagements that we kind of take for granted as happening in a certain place, but actually don't. And buyer indecision is rising. That's the point of the recent book, The Jolt Effect. Buyers cross a Rubicon from their FOMO, the fear of missing out, which is the pain, the justification, the area that we tend to focus on as salespeople, to FOMO, the fear of messing up. And they start to think of everything that can go wrong. And often decision makers don't want to be on the hook, so they defer to their team or committees. Sellers often can't reach many of the members of the committee. So bottom line is selling is getting harder. So we need better tools. And for many of the companies I work with, they've been through this already in business process and operations. They've got process engineering, continuous improvement, defect tracking, et cetera. But sales process, for some reason, remains rather different. So let's dig into what each of these terms actually means and actually talks about. Sales methodology. It's really the how. By how, I mean the kinds of questions that are asked, how they're phrased, the order that topics are raised, how pain is uncovered and quantified. Examples that you're probably familiar with include gap selling and Sandler and challenger sale and spin selling. There's a lot of others, but those are ones that you may be familiar with. Methodologies are trained. Training is a periodic group activity. You might have, for instance, at the beginning, 6 months of weekly work with a couple 1 to 2 day workshops along the way. That's to get familiar, to get ramped up in a methodology. And then you're probably going to want to have sessions, whether they're monthly or quarterly or semi-annually, for a refresher and update. And of course, you also need to have access to this training material and to the to the people or the materials, because as you add new sales reps, they need to be trained because everyone needs to be using the same methodology. That helps to ensure that everyone understands the language that each other is using, that the terminology is the same. When you say something, you understand where you are in the methodology, and that can help in co-selling. It is important for coaching and everything else. Methodologies are trained on occasion, but they're routinely coached and they're routinely role played. And I would argue if you're not doing role playing, you're not doing coaching. Some of that coaching and role playing involves how to ask questions, how to use the methodology to achieve certain process milestones, etc. Now, here's a rule of thumb: if you can't name the methodology that your team is using, you've got a problem. And honestly, at that point, you probably can be confident that you don't have a sales methodology. Sales process is different. Sales process is the what. Now, a typical sales process is a company receives an inquiry, they pitch an about us deck, some kind of an introductory meeting, this interminable vomiting up of information that no one else cares about except them, about us, how many years we've been in business, how many millions of dollars of VC funding, how many square feet of factory space, whatever industry you're in, you've got the same about us kind of deck in it. They all sound the same and they're all horrible. Then often there's some kind of a simple discovery process. Then typically what happens is a sales rep will find a problem. And as soon as they find the problem, they get happy ears, everything screeches to a halt. They run a quick BANT process for a simple qualification, budget, authority, need, timeline. And then if they determine with their happy ears that this is a qualified project, then they go racing off. They collect some technical details. They prepare and send a quote. And then there's lots of touching base and follow up and hoping. So the sales process in this case is fairly passive and it's quite self-serving. And it really just screeches to a halt once a rep hears a problem and the rep gets happy ears. They get excited about solving it. They issue a quote. And then at that point, the buyer's got everything they need from you without you having any idea whether they're going to buy, why they might buy, what the reason is to buy, who else they're talking to, any of that kind of stuff. And this, of course, is why 40% of deals now end in no decision. That goes back to the jolt effect and indecision. A lot of it is poor salesmanship. Now, in contrast, a sales process that's more effective is something that includes a number of milestones and checkpoints. And a good example of a strong sales process is baseline selling from Dave Curlin. It uses the analogy of a baseball diamond to guide the activities from the batter's box to first base, first to second, second to third, and third to home. If you look at these lists, and it's probably a little bit small, but you ought to be able to read them, you realize that most of what happens is that once a rep hears about the problem, then they race to quoting, and maybe they ask a couple questions, but basically they're doing the equivalent of cutting across the baseball diamond from first base, where they hear the problem, have a first meeting, to third base, where they're getting ready to issue a quote. Now, obviously, in that case, if you understand baseball, if you're listening from the US and you've got some vague familiarity, you know that you can't do that. You have to round second base. You have to touch the base. You can get thrown out along the way. There's a lot that goes on. And so if you just cut from first to third, not only are you out, but in a sales sense, in the context of the sales process, you're missing all of these critical steps that happen between second and third, and between first and second, and between second and third. And those are critical to make sure that when it comes time to share the proposal, to discuss value, to ask for the business, it's critical that you have those pieces in place, so that you actually have an understanding of the predictability of closing. And you shouldn't be there if you don't have all those pieces in place. And obviously, this has to get built into your CRM as well. Now, there's another tool that I want to talk about, and that's what you might call a deal scorecard, or a deal checklist, an opportunity scorecard. There's lots of different names that are used. Now, I know that you won't be able to read this on the slide, but this is an example from a guy named Kevin Dorsey, KD. He's well known in SaaS sales. What this is a document that codifies all of the details that you have to understand, determine, research, confirm, double check, et cetera, along the way, throughout the sales process. So it's going to capture some stuff that's part of methodology, some stuff that's part of the process. It's going to be in very granular detail. Some of it may be in the CRM, but what you might not want to do is make the CRM sales pipeline so complex with so many fields and so much detail that it's hard to kind of review it at a single glance. And that's where this kind of a document can be really helpful. So this one from KD includes, for instance, a backwards planning timeline. When you determine the compelling reason and understand the buying decision process, you can be confident in a required implementation date. That gives you information that you can use to help manage the sales process and make sure, because now you understand the very compelling business reason why your buyer has to achieve it, you can actually work on their behalf to keep them on track, because it's important to them in their business, not just because that's, you've signed up that this deal is going to close this quarter, and so you're frantic to try to get it done. So you can work back from that date with the critical path dates along the way, and if you're slipping, and you can help keep things on track. It will also identify all the members of the buying team by job title, and you have to plug names into them. You have to understand what each of their preferences and their buying style, and depending on the methodology, you use different names for what their role is in the buying team. But you have to recognize that some are not going to be accessible to the sales rep. Some you may access through top-to-top selling. Some are going to intentionally avoid. Some are going to wish they weren't part of that team. Some are going to work against the interests of the team. There's a lot of stuff going on with buying teams. KD also talks about exit criteria that are non-negotiable when you're going to move from one stage of the sales process to another. In other words, you're not going to quote, for instance, before you've done all the other work that leads up to that, because otherwise you end up with unqualified deals with 80% likelihood in the pipeline that just never, ever, ever close. So this ties in tightly, obviously, with the sales process. The last tool that we're going to talk about is the sales playbook. Now, this is kind of like the user's manual that ties all these pieces together. So each of these tools, the sales methodology, the sales process, the opportunity scorecard or sales deal checklist, we need to weave everything together into a cohesive set of guidelines and instructions with assembly and operating instructions, basically. So the sales playbook includes a number of elements, and some of the typical ones are listed here. A new rep should basically be able to just pick up the playbook and start running. But, for instance, it's going to have the ideal buyer description. It's going to identify the marketing resources or the sales operations resources to access data, the databases or lists where you can find the ideal buyers. It's going to talk about the ideal buying team, the personas. It's going to include battle cards for specific competitors, including details about knockout plays for incumbents and their pricing and their strengths and weaknesses versus your strengths and weaknesses. It will have details and examples of prospecting sequences, templates, scripts, messaging. You'll have enablement tools like offer documents or blog posts or videos that you can share at different stages in prospecting. So you're not just saying, hey, we have a meeting, but you're providing value. It's going to talk about the trigger events. When a prospect encounters a situation that suddenly means they have to think seriously about what you're doing, and how you can identify those, how you can keep your ear to the rail to know what's going on, whether it's with intent data or Google Alerts or a variety of other tools. Of course, it's going to talk about sales process. It's going to talk about KPIs are important along the way. It's going to include questions and topics and outlines for a discovery call. It may talk about how you're going to debrief, how you're going to plan for calls. It may have a pre-call planning checklist. It may talk about how you debrief from calls. It's going to talk about common problems buyers have, pain, and the outcomes they're looking for, and that sort of thing. All of these tools together, you should be getting the picture at this point. They fit in as an engineered system. And this is kind of the fundamental point that often people don't get about this. It's about an engineered system that ties each of these in with everything else. The sales process doesn't stand alone. Forecasts are inaccurate when there isn't a process, there isn't a scorecard, there isn't a methodology. Sales coaching and role playing needs the framework of those tools in order to be consistent and build toward progressive capability rather than just talk about random situations. Lead generation on the marketing side, new logo acquisition on the sales side tie into this. Sales KPIs like the close rate, for instance, are only meaningful if everyone follows the same process and if we agree on how opportunities are going to be qualified. To talk about your close rate or the length of the sales cycle, if everyone puts a quote unquote qualified opportunity in the pipeline in a completely different state with different information, then those metrics are meaningless. So you got to have common definitions. And marketing weaves in throughout all of this. As you go back to thinking about that buying journey, marketing provides insights and information to sales. Sales does the opposite, provides it back to marketing. So everything has to fit together. And that's really the essence of my overall revenue effectiveness methodology that integrates all aspects of strategy, marketing, and sales into a framework for revenue growth that treats it like an engineered process. So if you're interested, you can look up overall revenue effectiveness. You can email me, you can ping me. Happy to talk about it. All right. So here's what I promised you. As we come to the end of this discussion about sales process, I promised you the opportunity to have a free sales process grader. And what I'm going to do is take myself off the screen quickly, blow this up for you a little bit so you can get that scan. So go ahead, scan that code through my friends at OMG. You're going to have the opportunity to jump in. It's a really simple online process. You kind of slide steps in your sales process back and forth, map it out the way you currently do it, leave things out that don't apply, and you'll have the opportunity. You'll get a grade back for your sales process. So hope you find value in that. I'm happy to follow up after you've done that. We can have a chat about any of these elements. We can talk about how you'd be able to evaluate your sales team for their ability to actually execute on these things, how you build the sales playbook, how you build a sales process, how your current process might be contributing to some of the problems that you see. And, all of those kinds of things. Happy to set up a complimentary 30-minute call and just talk through some issues. But by all means, scan this code, try the free sales process grader, and I think you're going to get some valuable information from that. So with that, it looks like there's no specific questions that I have to answer. So I thank everyone for joining me today. Thanks for sharing your time. Hope you found some value in this, and leave here if nothing else with clarity in the difference between sales methodology, sales process, sales playbook, and a qualification scorecard or a deal process checklist. Thanks very much for joining me today. I'm Ed Marsh, founder of Ed Marsh Consulting. I work with mid-market B2B sales teams, and in the industrial space, I work across the entire revenue growth from digital marketing, board effectiveness, and strategy, all the way down through technology and customer success. Thanks very much.